Hey guys, welcome back. Let's do part 2 and close out the rest of this chapter, chapter 12. Jesus is starting to talk about preparing for his coming. So, how we should be preparing, and he gives us a nice example of how it's supposed to look like and what happens when we don't. So he starts off in verse 35. Be dressed for service and keep your lamps burning as though you were waiting for your master to return from the wedding feast. He goes on to say how the master may come in the middle of the night or just before dawn, but whenever he comes, he will reward the servants who are ready. So we have choices, right? We can stay on our P's and Q's. We can continue to follow faithfully, or in this literal story here, we can be doing our job, or we can not do our job and then reap the repercussions of that. So we should be ready at all times because the Son of Man will come when least expected. So he goes on to say that a faithful, sensible servant is one to whom the master can give the responsibility of managing his other household servants and feeding them. If the master returns and finds that the servant has done a good job, there will be a reward. I tell you the truth, the master will put the servant in charge of all he owns. But what if the servant thinks, my master won't be back for a while, and he begins beating the other servants, partying and getting drunk? The master will return unannounced and unexpected, and he will cut the servant in pieces and banish him with the unfaithful. It goes on to talk about if the servant knows what the master wants or expects and doesn't do it, what the repercussions of that is, versus someone who doesn't know and still does wrong and the punishment for that. It goes on to say in the final verse, to whom is given much, much will be required in return, and when someone has been entrusted with much, even more will be required. So let me dive into these notes. Christ's return at an unexpected time is not a trap, a trick by which God hopes to catch us off guard. In fact, God is delaying his return so more people have the opportunity to follow him. Before Christ's return, we have time to live out our beliefs and to reflect Jesus' love as we relate to others. People who are ready for their Lord's return are not hypocritical but sincere. They're not fearful but ready to witness. They're not worried but trusting. They're not greedy but generous, and they're not lazy but diligent. May your life be more like Christ, so when he comes, you will be ready to greet him joyfully. Sometimes when you're younger, there's that temptation to be like, oh, well, I'm just going to keep doing what I want. And when I get older, that's when I'll get right with Jesus because that's when everybody else does it. But while I'm young, I'm still going to do whatever I want. We are not promised a whole life, right? We could die tomorrow. And then what? We didn't have time to repent or get right with Jesus. And then so our only option is to go to hell. And that's a choice that we made. Let's be mindful of these things. Okay. Jesus promises a reward for those who have been faithful to the Master. While we sometimes experience immediate and material rewards for our obedience to God, this is not always the case. If so, we would be tempted to boast about our achievements and only do good for what we get. Jesus said that if we look for rewards now, we will lose them later. Our heavenly rewards will be the most accurate reflection of what we have done on earth, and they will be far greater than we can imagine. God sees our heart, right? So whatever show we're trying to put for anybody else outside, maybe others can be fooled, but God knows our hearts. What is our heart posture behind the things that we're doing? Is it just because we're trying to reap benefits while we're here on earth? Or are we doing this out of just genuine obedience? Because obedience is an expression of love. Jesus has told us how to live until he comes. We must watch for him, work diligently, and obey his commands. Such attitudes are especially necessary for leaders. Watchful and faithful leaders will be given increased opportunities and responsibilities. The more resources, talents, and understanding we have, the more we are required to use them effectively. That doesn't mean we got to stop growing so that we're not held to a higher standard or level of responsibility. God will not hold us responsible for gifts he has not given us, but all of us have been given enough gifts and duties to keep us busy until Jesus returns. We are supposed to be working and serving. On this time that we're here, we're supposed to be serving Christ, doing what he has asked us to do, and being obedient to the calling. Okay, so let's get into this whole the warning about the coming division, about these families being broken up, father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother. It sounds very chaotic, and I think initially, if we're not fully understanding, we could be confusing what Jesus is trying to tell us. The passage here also starts off with the terrible baptism of suffering ahead of me. So I'm gonna share a little bit about that. But yeah, let's dive into what the note says. Says the baptism of suffering to which Jesus referred was his coming crucifixion. Jesus was dreading the physical pain, of course, but even worse would be the spiritual pain of complete separation from God that would accompany his death for the sins of the world. God cannot be in the presence of sin, right? And so when Jesus takes on all of this sin, all of our sin on him, God has to turn away from him. Sin is what separates us from God. So Jesus is separating from God during that time when that happens. That's what he's referring to with the baptism of suffering. The next note, in these strange and unsettling words, Jesus revealed that his coming often results in conflict. Because he demands a response, families may be split apart when some choose to follow him and others refuse to do so. So separation is not just because, not to cause strife. It has everything to do with what we end up standing for, what we believe in. Jesus allows no middle ground. He demands loyalty and commitment, sometimes to the point of severing other relationships. Are you willing to risk your family's disapproval in order to follow the Lord? That's a big thing, because, family is supposed to be really important. The Bible tells us that, but nothing comes before God. And so can be a very challenging line to walk. There's obviously going to be conflict. There's going to be discomfort, but we need to be firm and confident in what we believe and what stand we are going to take for Christ. So it's actually nothing about just division for nothing because Jesus is a mean person. It's very much just calling us out, like, are we in it or are we not? We're not going to have one foot in and one foot out. You're either all in or you're not. There's, pick a side. You're either on board or you're not. So now we're talking about Jesus warns about the future crisis. So he's talking about how they can interpret the weather, but they can't figure out what is coming. And he gives the advice about when you are on the way to court with your accuser, try to settle the matter before you get there. It's a little tips. So let's read what the Bible has to say about that one. It says, for most of recorded history, the world's principal occupation was farming. The farming depended directly on the weather for his livelihood. He needed just the right amounts of sun and rain, not too much, not too little, to make his living, and he grew skilled at interpreting natural signs. Jesus was announcing an earth-shaking event that would be much more important than the year's crops, the coming of God's kingdom. Just as dark clouds forewarn a rainstorm, there were signs that the kingdom would soon arrive. Jesus was there. But Jesus' hearers, though skilled at interpreting weather signs, were intentionally ignoring the signs of the times. Guys, there are real consequences if we choose to ignore the signs. I know sometimes we can think that it's going to be hard and we're trying to avoid it. No, you guys, we can't ignore it. That's what I have for chapter 12. I hope some of that was helpful. I know that the notes in my Bible were super helpful for me for this chapter, so I hope some of that benefited you. If you have any thoughts, drop them in the comments. I would love to read them. And again, my name is Denise. I am with Misfit of Creation. Be sure to check out my Etsy shop. I have a bunch of downloadable Bible studies, devotionals, study charts, templates even. And I also have a podcast that comes out with new episodes every Tuesday. It's called Prodigal Peas in a Pod, and we talk about what it's like to walk out in faith in real life, the messiness, the awkwardness, the victories, the setbacks and challenges, everything that it all entails. And we share a lot about our own personal lives. So again, Prodigal Peas in a Pod, and you can find us on any podcast streaming platform. If you would like to be a supporter of my ministry, you can find me on Patreon, and I'll drop that link just below for you. So, all right, I'll catch you on the next one.